Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our monthly speaker meeting. While we're waiting for others to join us, I thought I would update you briefly on what's going on in our chapter this summer, and then we'll get on to our presentation. Hey, it's vacation time, right? So our president, Fiona Vivial, is on a well-deserved break, and I'm standing in for her. So here I go. My name is Liz Farquhar, and I'm the one who sends you the email newsletters, and I'm also in charge of the magazine. Um, so here's some things that I'd like you to remember, and the slides have been rolling, so it's probably already stuck in your mind. First of all, we're a year-round chapter now, so our activities and our events go on 12 months of the year instead of taking a break in the summer. That includes our Birds and Brew event, which is a weekday morning bird walk followed by a presentation and some social time. So we decided to jazz it up a little for those of us who are still in the valley suffering through 115-degree heat. So on July 23rd, Birds and Brew will start with an early morning bird walk at Veterans Oasis Park, followed by a presentation by an expert at Shields Sporting Goods. He's going to talk about binoculars, scopes, and other kinds of optics that are important in the birding game. So you can come and learn everything you need to know about your binoculars. On August 27th, the Birds and Brew group are going to go on a field trip, a really exciting field trip. They're going down to the Wow, Arizona Nature Preserve to see some birds and some beautiful gardens. The preserve is located in the Santa Rita Mountains, the Santa Catalina Mountains on the western flank. So it will be pretty much an all-day trip. So for the July 23rd Birds and Brew, when we're going to Shields, we would like you to register for that so that we know how many chairs to set up and how many bottles of water we need to have. And in order to do that, please email Carlotta Thorne. On August 27th, we're limiting this group to 8 people because it's a drive. We're going to have to arrange cars and such. So if you want to be part of that, you really need to register for that. So shoot an email to Fiona Vivial and get signed up. The details of this are all in the newsletter. So if you have any questions, you can also email us at the chapter Gmail account. Our next speaker on August 13th is going to be Margaret Dykman. Margaret is returning to the podium. She spoke to us a couple of years ago about her book, Birding in Northern Arizona. But since that time, she's been doing some thinking and some research on the birds in southern Arizona versus the birds in northern Arizona, how they're different, how they're the same, and how things have changed in years past and now. I think that's going to be a really interesting presentation. That will also be the last speaker meeting that is Zoom only. In September, we're going to go back to our hybrid format where you can come and experience the speaker in person at the Southeast Regional Library, or you can sign up and participate by Zoom. So anyhow, on with the show. I'm delighted to introduce to you Scott Harris, tonight's presenter. Scott is a wildlife photographer and the author of Raptor Quest, Chasing America's Raptors. The book traces Scott's cross-country adventure to find and photograph all of our birds of prey in the lower 48 states. His photographic style is to zoom in on the eyes of the animal in order to draw attention to the individual bird. I'm looking forward to hearing about the experiences he had collecting these pretty intimate pictures of wild birds. So another point, the chat is open. If you have any questions, please just write them in the chat. I'm going to keep track of them. And when Scott is done with his presentation, I'll ask the questions for you and he can answer them. So there you go. On with the show. Over to you, Scott.
Liz, thank you very much. And let's get the share screen up. All right. Can you guys, can you see my screen now? Liz?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Excellent. 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 That's the hardest part of the entire evening, and we've got that accomplished. So First thing I want to do is thank Keith for helping me set that up with the technology, and Liz for the introduction, and then everybody at Desert Rivers Audubon for making this possible, and for joining us tonight. I think we're going to have some fun. I look forward to doing these presentations. I'm excited about doing it. My favorite part, I will readily admit, is the questions at the end. So if you've got some, please ask. It is always fun to see what people are interested in or have questions about. This book called Raptor Quest was a labor of love of mine. The book and the photos were a big part of the journey that I took, a huge part, actually. The only thing that was bigger than that was the people that I met. Excuse me. As we'll learn over the course of the presentation, I did quite a bit of traveling to try to track these birds down, and I met an absolute ton of great people, very helpful people, who were kind enough to get me on birds or get me into the right area or educate me about the habitat and whatnot. And so all of that for me was a thrill, and there's no way I could have done this without that help. So I was absolutely pleased to see that happen. A little background, my wife and I retired from Southern California and moved to South Carolina about 4 years ago. When we got here, I was not a birder. I mean, I enjoyed all things nature. I camped. My wife and I did a 6-month camping trip, and I loved all kinds of animals and birds, but I wasn't a birder specifically. So that was probably my bad. My wife and I have been fortunate to travel to all 50 states and I think 37 different countries. I would have loved to have been a birder during that to see what I might have seen. But I've been thrilled doing it just recently. And so it has been an exciting thing. The first day that we were here at our home, we live on a Lake Greenwood in South Carolina. We bought the house online. We hadn't actually ever been here before. And so the first day that we moved here, we were thrilled to have, not these two, but we were thrilled to have a bald eagle fly over the house. And I took that as a really cool sign. Flew over the house and landed in one of the trees right by the lake. So that was very exciting. These two juvenile balds are from Maine. And if any of you went and tried to chase the Stellar sea eagle, I made 2 trips and I'll talk about that later, but this shot is from that trip. Maybe the only trip you'll ever make where bald eagles look small. I am a writer. This book, Raptor Quest, is the 50th book that I've published in the last 7 years. I published a couple, 3 since. Actually, one of them just got released today, but none of them were about birding. But as much as I love writing, I wanted to find something to write about, you know, as far as birding goes. But I'm not a scientist. I'm not an ornithologist, and I didn't want to pretend to be. So I kind of played around and tried to figure things out, what might be the best thing for me to write about. And I happened to watch the movie The Big Year. I imagine a lot of you have seen it. It was a fun movie. I actually saw it long before I became a birder, just because I like the 3 stars. And I watched it again once I started birding and had a little germination of an idea. I like all birds. I mean, I think it's fantastic, but I very definitely prefer raptors over all other birds. There is just something about them that attracts me. Liz and I were actually talking about that before the event started tonight. And for those who do love raptors, there's just something different about them than there are about other birds. Not better or worse, just different. And so the idea of a big year appealed to me. Like most of us, if not all of us, I had limits on time and expertise and budget. But as I started to do some research, I discovered that there are generally accepted 53 raptors that call the lower 48 states home. And we'll talk about why I say generally accepted. But nonetheless, that's the number that is almost always used. And I thought, well, that's kind of a cool thing. That's a reasonable number, or so I thought. And my big year turned out to be a really big year. It took me 17 months to track down all 53. I think if I was to do it again, I would do a better job, a different job of picking up the ones that are difficult and getting those early. But I didn't really realize how hard some of them were going to be, or at least how hard they were going to be for me. And so it wound up, I had to wait for another winter to cycle through in order to get a couple of the owls up north. When we talk about the 53 Raptors, this is the breakdown. You've got the 3 vultures, the black, and of course the one right there, and the condor. You've got 19 owls and 31 traditional diurnals. There's a lot of discussion and debate about whether vultures should be considered raptors or not. By a lot of standards, they don't. And I did a lot of reading, and I came out on the side of I would not categorize them as raptors if it was left up to me, which of course it won't be. But a lot of people do, and I thought, you know what, I should make this a part of it. But one of the things I discovered when I talk about generally accepted raptors is there is no clear definition of what a raptor is. As a matter of fact, there's quite a few different definitions, and many of them are in conflict. And the more research I did, the less clear it became. And it kind of reminded me of Supreme Court Justice Potter Stewart, and most of you probably heard this, but in 1964, he famously said that while he couldn't define pornography, he knew it when he saw it. And I think that's kind of how it is with raptors. They are distinct, they are different, and so most of us are able to do that. But it's a fun question to ask. Are vultures raptors? Should Harlan's hawks be split out from red tails, which they have twice in the past, and then they've been grouped back in. And there's a lot of talk that they'll be split back out, which means for those of us that have been fortunate enough to see Harlan's, we'll pick up a live bird for doing absolutely nothing. I read a number of articles that talked about the fact that maybe owls shouldn't be considered raptors. There was some logic to it, but not enough to sway me. And then there are a number of arguments. People want to add birds like parrots into the raptor category. So there is no definition you can come where there is not a bird that is not included in these 53, but wouldn't meet those standards. Whether it's beaks, whether it's killing with your talons, whether it's, most birds, a lot of birds, of course, eat meat, even as small as insects. So it's really an interesting little battle. There's also, I think, some discussion to be had actually by U.S. raptors. I think the hook-billed kite, for example, is more of a Mexican bird with an occasional visit into southeastern Texas. And on the other side of the other northern part of the country, you've got the northern hawk, the snowy, and the great gray owls. I think they're more Canadian than U.S., but we get them in the winter. They sometimes breed down here. And so this is America, so we take them and count them. And that's where we wind up with the 53. This was my canvas, the 48 lower states. Alaska has no raptors that the lower 48 states don't. Hawaii does. It's got a Hawaiian hawk, and they also have a short-eared owl that, again, I believe they're working on it now. There are programs and doctoral theses being written to separate that out from the regular short-eared owl. So we may pick up another raptor there. I was there during this project. I didn't see the Hawaiian hawk, but I did see the short-eared owl, and you can certainly tell the differences in it. Number one, it's a daytime hunter, whereas our short-eared owls here are crepuscular. They're hunting at dawn and dusk. They do not hunt during the balance of the day. The short-eared owl in Hawaii is a daytime owl. So I thought that was kind of interesting. We've got, of the 53 raptors, 20 of them have been found in all 48 states, which I think is pretty cool. Obviously, some with more frequency than others, but nonetheless, if you use eBird as your guide, we have 20 of the 53 that have been found in all 48 states. We have 2 that have been found in 47 states. The northern goshawk, or it was when I wrote the book, now the American goshawk, and the northern sawwood owl. And the only state that they have both skipped is Louisiana. I don't know why. I mean, they went to Texas on one side, Mississippi on the other, but neither of the birds have ever been spotted in Louisiana. The snowy owl has only skipped 2 states, Arizona and New Mexico. Of course, it doesn't mean they've not been there. It just means they haven't been spotted and reported. And 5 of the Raptors have been found in 3 states fewer. Um, sorry, I should have jumped that ahead a little bit. And those would be the Apple falcon and the Ferruginous owl, which are south, the whiskered screech owl, the hook-billed kite, and the white-tailed hawk. So those aren't seen often. And if you want to find those, actually to find all of them, you got to kind of head down to the southeast. So that's kind of fun. Now, the distribution of me, separate from that, is, again, this was my canvas, the 48 states. My preferred mode of travel is driving. I love to drive, always have. I bought a brand new truck 3 years ago, and I've got about 110,000 miles on it already, mostly from these trips. I did a number of cross-country driving trips to Montana, and in California, Texas, Florida. Some of those states I did multiple trips. Texas, I think, was 5. California was 4. So was Montana. Those are active Raptor states, and so I would go back time and time again. I did tens of day trips. I did 13 round-trip flights over the course of the time. I had more than 50 legs of flights, and I hear people complain all the time about the airlines and stuff. But I got to tell you, 49 of my 50 legs went flawlessly. They left on time. They landed on time. No turbulence. The wheels stayed on. The wings stayed on. It was a good thing. The only one that changed that a little bit, and you can't really blame the airline, is I flew into Houston in order to fly down to Harlingen to try to find a hook-billed kite. Took me 4 trips down there to get it. So we jumped on a plane in Houston and took off toward Harlingen. We got about 15 minutes out, and the pilot came on and said, "Hey, we might have trouble down there. There's a lot of fog, and not sure how it's going to work out. But we've got 15 minutes worth of fuel left, so we're going to poke around and see if we can land. And if we can't, we're going to turn around and go back to Houston." Well, I'm not a math genius, but we flew 45 minutes to get from Houston to where we were. 15 minutes of fuel wasn't going to get us back. And the pilot, about 2 minutes later, figured that out, came online, said, "I'm sorry, I should have been clear. We have 15 minutes worth of fuel to play with and then still get back to Houston inside the safety zone." So you could hear a large sigh of relief. I traveled 25 different weeks. I visited 34 states, and collectively I went over 100,000 miles. And so I really, I put on a lot of miles. I used eBird, and as I made more and more friends over the course of the trip, I would get phone calls from people who would say, "Hey, you got to come here. You got to look at this." And so I was able to do that, and that was a blessing. As far as my driving goes, it was fantastic. I never broke down, not even a flat tire. These are the flights, and those are the states. There we go. But one time I was up in Montana, and I was looking for a snowy owl at the Flathead Lake Sky Ranch Airport, which is just outside of Kalispell. And I went day after day after day. I put in about 15 hours of time poking around that place, and got to know it pretty well. But I didn't find the snowy. So I had known of a place that was about 3.5 hours away that's spectacular for raptors. I jumped in the truck, I drove over there, and in the space of about 4 hours, I found 119 different raptors, which was just, for me, spectacular. And I thought, okay, if I leave now, I can get back to that airport before dusk and maybe find that snowy today. So I typed in Manning Road, which is the main road there in that little airport, and it said 3.5 hours, hit the directions, and off I went. I turned a book on tape on, and I didn't pay any attention, which turned out to have been my bad. I wound up driving 3.5 hours north until I got to the Canadian border. And by the time I discovered I was there and looked up, I was past the point where I could turn around. I didn't think it was going to be that big a deal. Turns out they had a Manning Road in Alberta. It was exactly the same distance as the one I wanted to go to in Montana. So I just told the guy at the gate, I blew it. I just need to make a quick U-turn, head back into the States. let me see your passport, which I didn't have with me. I now carry it all the time. I wound up spending over 3 hours in Canadian customs. And when I finally got out, I got my little paper that said, hey, no problem, no drugs, no guns, no record or anything. I quit my quick U-turn 100 yards into the US, and they put me the same thing, and I was there for 4 hours. So I was 7
Scott?
hours because I didn't pay attention while I was driving. Yes,
Scott, you're breaking up,
yes,
and there's been a suggestion that perhaps if you turn off your camera, your sound
okay,
quality will improve. There. Thank you.
sure. Let me know if that works. I'm not sure what else I can do. Haven't run into that problem before, but if there is a suggestion, I will take it. And this, see if I can, there we go. This wound up being the snowy owl. I went back one more time to the airport after having to spend a total of about 15 hours there. By the way, great names: Sky Ranch Lane, Pheasant Heaven, Moonbow Loop, and of course, Manning Road. I felt I was starting to get to know the neighbors. It was such a small area. I had about 15 minutes left before I had to leave for the main airport and catch a flight home. And I had not seen the bird. I was pretty disappointed. And I pulled up next to a guy who was parked on the side of the road, as a lot of us do when we're birding. And I said, hey, any chance you've seen the snowy? And he pointed out his window and he said, you mean the one right there? And there it was, right on this little shed behind a house. So that turned out to be perfect. Is this working better? Is this audio better?
Yes, it seems to be better. Thank you very much.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. All right. So Raptors by state, to give you an idea of where I found them. Now, this doesn't mean that I found them exclusively in these states. It's just where I chose to count them when I did find them. And so it's been kind of fun to keep track. There were 5 states where I found 1 or 2, North Dakota, Pennsylvania, Wyoming, Minnesota, and New Jersey. There were 2 states with 4, Colorado, and all 4 of those were owls, and Florida. There were 2 states with 5, California and your state, Arizona. Obviously, I could have had more in either or both of those states, but that's how many I went with. There were 8 in Montana, and Montana might have been my most valuable state. I found the snowy, I found the short and long-eared owls, rough-legged hawk, Harlan's hawk, although it's not part of the 53, now the American goshawk, and I found my last 2, which I was starting to struggle to find, a gyrfalcon and the very last one, which was the northern hawk owl. 1 state with 9, that was South Carolina, my home state, and 1 state with 11, which was Texas, and 12 if you count the rarity of the bat falcon. I don't know if any of you went and chased that bat falcon or not, but that was sure a blast if you did. And so this shows you all of the different states where I kept track of the raptors that I saw. I went to a lot of hawk watches. These are some of them. By the way, one of the things I learned is that hawk watch is spelled differently by most of the places. Sometimes it's 1 word, sometimes it's 2, sometimes the W is capitalized, sometimes it's not. It doesn't matter that much, but it drove my editor crazy when they were getting ready to publish the book. The one thing they had in common was they all had enthusiastic and devoted volunteers. I saw 24 different species between the different hawk watches I went to, thousands and thousands of raptors. But as it turns out, I'm not a huge fan of hawk watches. I thought I would be, but I'm not. It just, the little specks going by and trying to determine if it was a Sharpie or a Cooper's and those different things. I like to be able to really look at a raptor. I mean, get a good look at it on a fence or a tree or wherever it might be. So hawk watches are not something I'll be frequenting in the future, but I'm glad I had the opportunity. I love the people that I met and their enthusiasm for what they did. And so it was a terrific thing. A lot of people ask me what the tougher birds were for me. These were the 8 that I saw once during this program. Now, most of them I've seen again since, but in the 17 months, these are the 8 birds that I saw once. The the common blackhawk, which was actually at the two-back hawk watch in Arizona, the flammulated owl, which was my herd only of the 53. The other 52 I was able to spot, but the flam I could only get ears on. The gyr falcon, I was lucky. I got a call from somebody in Montana. They were on one. I flew in, and within an hour I had it. Hook-billed kite, 4 trips to Benson State Park in Texas, and on the 4th one, with 10 or 15 minutes to go, I was able to spot one, so I was thrilled. American goshawk, I got on my misguided Canada trip. Northern hawk owl was in Wise River, Montana, and that was a spectacular bird to see, just stunning. Middle of winter, minus 25 degrees, and I found it as soon as I got to this small town, and I was able to watch it for a better part of 2 days, and that's one of those shots is actually the cover of my book. Short-eared owl was in Montana as well, and got to see a pair of them at sunset. And it was just a stunning night as I was watching the short ears over an open field. A flock of hundreds of sandhill cranes went by, and then suddenly my short ears took off, and a great horned owl landed on a fence post about 10 feet away from me and took control of the field. And so that was just a beautiful thing. The whiskered screech owl was also from Arizona. I felt very fortunate to see that, and was out all night looking for it, and finally got one, and was absolutely thrilled by that turn of events. So that was an exciting thing for me. The ferruginous pygmy owl is a tough one to get. If you're looking for it in the United States, the best place to go is the King Ranch down in Texas, which, by the way, the King Ranch is larger than the entire state of Rhode Island. And when I went on an all-day trip on the King Ranch, and in the morning, I heard one, but barely. I wasn't comfortable counting it, although the guide said they were certain. A little later on in the day, we saw one, but didn't get a great look at it, so that was a little disappointing. And then we stopped for a late lunch, and we pulled up at a picnic table somewhere in the middle of this ranch, and the bird you're looking at was sitting on a tree, maybe 10 feet from the bench that we were sitting on. Sat there, let us take gorgeous pictures, didn't seem to care about people at all, and did a little singing, so that was really terrific. And the King Ranch is also where I got my white-tailed hawk. And I met some really neat people on that trip. And one of those people was a young man named Frank Fabro. Frank was, or is, a college student. He was a great guy. He'd done some work for a lumber company, spotting and marking spotted owl nests so that they wouldn't clear the lumber within, I think it was a quarter-mile round of the nest itself. So he said, hey, if you have trouble getting onto a spotted, give me a call and I'll help you with that. So I thought, well, I got to go to California anyway. So I gave him a call. We set up a place to meet a couple hours away from where I was staying. And he said, you got to make sure you get the directions correct, because where we're going, there's no cell phone service. You got to be here. We won't have a way of contacting each other. Fortunately, forgive me. Fortunately, we did connect, and we took off going through the forests of California. And he actually brought 2 machetes. We had to chop our way through, and we wound up getting into a small clearing, maybe 20 feet by 20 feet. And this spotted owl was there. And we sat down, we packed in our lunches. We sat and ate lunch on a couple of logs and watched this spotted owl, who never left. It just preened, it slept, it ignored us. It was actually one of the highlights of the entire time. It was an amazing trip, and an amazing thing to be able to see this, and just to be able to stare at it and see its beauty and the way it worked. It dropped down and got a mouse while we were there. It was truly a highlight, if not the highlight, of the trip. This is a swallow-tailed kite. This was shot over our lake, Lake Greenwood in South Carolina. I was out on the lake with my son. We were out on a pontoon boat, enjoying a conversation and a cigar. I had my camera with me, and I had just taken him up 3 or 4 days earlier and shot some swallowtails, but none had ever been seen over our lake, or again, none had ever been reported over our lake. And all of a sudden my son goes, Dad, I think there's a swallowtail. and I look up, and maybe 20 feet above our boat was this bird. So I managed to get a quick shot, and we followed the bird around for a while and got to watch it. And it was spectacular. And actually, that's where the idea for Raptor Quest came through. That's what my son and I started to have that conversation and went in depth and came back with that idea. So this is the first bird highlighted in the book, is the swallow-tailed kite, and it's because of the uniqueness of being able to see it over our lake. Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado is the home to many a small owl. And there's a gentleman up there named Scott Rashid who helped me find 4 owls. He's an expert on small owls. He's published a number of books. I did 2 trips with him. The guy is extremely passionate. At one point, we sat in it was a shallow river, maybe 6 inches. I guess that's more of a creek. We sat there for 18 hours waiting for a northern pygmy owl until it finally showed. But it was worth it. It was absolutely worth it. He runs a banding station, and they do it for about 10 days each year. The park gives him access to a ranch house, and he brings up all his equipment. And so I helped him set it up every night, and we would run back and forth as soon as a bird got caught in the net. And we were extremely fortunate in that we got a couple northern saw-whits and a couple of boreals over the course of the 4 or 5 nights that I was there. He said that was the first time that had happened, that he'd had multiple of both in the same year. So I felt really, really fortunate and really, really enjoyed the fact that we got to do that. And I learned a lot about small owls. But this is a guy that's got, I think it's about 35 different notebooks with notes. He's done this now for, this is his 25th season. And he keeps extensive notes on every bird that he finds, and knows more about them probably than anybody. At least I would certainly imagine that was the case. This is a Sharpie. I went up to Commissary Ridge in Wyoming, and actually I'm going back there later this month. And they had a banding station and a hawkwatch combination. But when you type in the address that you're given and you use it for GPS, you wind up out on a dirt road, but you can't find the banding station or the hawkwatch. And where they're staying, there's no cell service, so you can't call them and check. I drove around for about an hour and started to get discouraged. And then I finally saw a gate to what looked like a large ranch. So I took the liberty of opening the gate and letting myself in, closing it behind me, driving about 1.5 miles up to a ranch house that looked just like it came out of a movie set. And the woman who opened the door was somewhere between 50 and 100 years old, and she was made of leather, and she had this beautiful smile, just this welcoming smile. And before I could say a word, she said, "You're looking for the hawkwatch and the banding station?" I said, "I am, as a matter of fact." She goes, "Yeah, the GPS stuff doesn't work. Most people just wind up here." And she gave me exact directions, which worked out great. And I got up there. I got to hold this Sharpie and release it, which was very cool. And this, if you haven't been to Commissary Ridge, it's at the top of, it's just a rock mountain. I mean, there are no plants or anything. And at the very top of it, there are 3 full-time hawk watchers that are up there. And they've taken and built these rock nests that are about 2 or 3 feet tall. And they sit inside these to try to cut down the wind. And they sit there and they hawk watch all day long. They do it every day for 7 or 8 weeks. They spend the entire day in the rock fort. 1 day a week for a half a day, they go into town, then they're able to shower and shop for food. And otherwise, there's no showers for 6 days, and it's whatever food you have up there. And you talk about commitment and people being excited about what they're doing. These people were fantastic. And actually, one of the people up there was a woman who I had met when I was doing volunteer work at a Raptor rescue center in South Carolina. We didn't know each other very long. She left about 2 weeks after I started volunteering, but after we shared some time on the hill, we realized that we'd known each other. So that was a pleasant addition to the day. And the hawks fly lower going through Commissary Ridge, and you get some golden eagles coming through at a pretty good height. So that was the one where you got some really nice views, I think, going through. And so I spent a day up there with them and thoroughly enjoyed that. Red-tailed hawks and osprey are probably my favorite. I know how common they are, but goodness, I just love them. And I love some of the stories about red-tails. Most of you, maybe all of you, might know that bald eagles are almost always used when they need a big bird in a commercial or a TV show or a movie. But as you know, bald eagles, they sound like Mike Tyson. You know, it's high-pitched and squeaky, and whereas a red-tailed hawk has just a fierce call. And so that is the call that is used and overdubbed for all of the bald eagles, which is very cool. And I don't know how many of you know, but the reason that red-tailed hawks are so common throughout the United States is because of President Eisenhower. President Eisenhower, when he was president, developed a plan to run interstate highways throughout the country. He felt that we needed those. It would help us move around. If we went to war with Russia, that was right in the middle of the Cold War. Every 5 miles of his interstate, he wanted to have 1 mile straight so big bombers could land. And that project was started while he was president. It wasn't actually completed until 1994. But what Eisenhower had no idea he was doing was creating perfect habitat for red-tailed hawks. All these telephone poles now line these thousands of miles of highway, and they're mowed and cleared and, you know, on a certain 20, 30, 40 feet on each side of the highway, which sets up perfect habitat and perfect hunting ground for red-tailed hawks. And their numbers exploded along with the highway. And it just followed the highways. They just, as the highways would get completed, red-tailed hawks would show up. I remember we were driving through North Dakota, and it seemed like there was a red-tailed hawk on every power pole on both sides of this 2-lane highway that we were driving along. They were just all over. Peregrine falcons, great stories behind peregrines. This is not I want to be clear, this is not a picture that I took in the wild. This was a picture that I took at a photography birding workshop, but I love the shot and I thought I'd include it. And so, but since then I've gotten a number of good shots of peregrines in flight out at Torrey Pines in California. If you haven't been, it's a pretty common nesting place out there. And if you go during season, during the spring, you're almost guaranteed to find the peregrines, find them nesting, and then find the fledges. So it's a pretty cool deal. But I had a neat experience. A number of you may know, but peregrines have become very common there in just about every major city in the United States because they love pigeons, and they nest on cliffs, which our skyscrapers obviously replicate at some level and enough to make peregrine falcons happy. I met with some people at Four Seasons Hotel in Atlanta, and Atlanta has an aggressive peregrine program. They want to bring peregrines in because they think it might bring in some tourists, and more important, they think it might clear out some of their pigeons. So Four Seasons Hotel has a 50th floor, which is their dance floor that they use for weddings and various events. And so they built a spot for the peregrine falcons. They built a nesting box and a landing area and the whole thing. And this year was the first year that it was there during nesting season. They did not get any nesting peregrines, but they did get peregrines landing and eating their kills next to the box. So they're hoping that next year they'll actually have some urban peregrines right there at the Four Seasons Hotel in Atlanta. And I'll definitely go back for that if I can. Bald eagle. This one is at a place called Dobbins Farm in South Carolina. It's a great place to see eagles. I've seen up to 14 in a day, and you can get pretty close to them. There's a pond there that they love to fish in, and some trees that are pretty close. And as you can see, you can get some pretty close shots. If you really want to see bald eagles, if you're not familiar, check out Conowinga Dam, which is on the Susquehanna River in Maryland, about 45 minutes outside of Baltimore. They have the shad that come through there in, I think it's November. I'm going back this November. It's in November and again in April. And the shad come through the dam. And as they come through on the other side, a lot of them are killed. A lot of them are knocked unconscious. And there'll be up to 200 or 300 bald eagles in an area the size of a couple football fields, just swooping down and picking up these shad like it's a buffet. And it is spectacular to watch. And then you've got the cormorants in the water who are trying to steal them as well. So you've got battles between cormorants and eagles, between younger eagles and older eagles, and occasionally an osprey tries to jump in, but I've never seen an osprey successfully leave with a fish from there. But maybe they do, because they keep trying, and most of these animals aren't dumb. So that's a spectacular place. Osprey, if it's not red-tailed, osprey are my favorite. This is a shot down from a place called Sebastian Inlet in Florida. If you're not familiar with it, there's a bridge that goes over, and the osprey are there year round, but they're especially there in late fall when the mullets start running. There'll be dozens and dozens of osprey. From a photographer's point of view, it's a dream, because they're hitting those mullet over and over and over again, and maybe within 50 or 100 feet. So, with just a decent lens, you're out there. One of the things that I love about osprey is there are three things that are unique about them, relative to all other raptors, actually relative to all other raptors. One is they have a pure sushi lunch, pure sushi diet. It's been reported that they eat something else on occasion. I've not actually seen that myself or met someone who's seen it, but I don't, it's certainly possibly true. But 99.9% of their meals are live fish, which is really cool. They're the only bird in the world that when it migrates, carries a lunch with it. So all birds fill up to the maximum capacity that they can carry as far as food and protein, and osprey are no different. But when osprey are completely full and can't take another bite, they grab one more fish and they throw that in their talons. And as they take off over the next 24 hours or so, they eat that fish as they go along. So they're the only ones that pack a lunch. They're also the only ones that when they migrate, they do not come back 6 months later like every other bird that migrates. They wait and come back 18 months later. They skip a cycle. And so when they leave, let's say, the southern part of this country and go to South or Central America, they don't just stay 6 months, they stay 18. After that, their cycle is the same. 6 months here, 6 months there, that's what they do. Ornithologists have not been able to figure out why that is, but they do stay that 18 months. And the other thing about osprey that is unique is they dive for their food. Like a bald eagle skims the top, but an osprey can dive up to 2.5 feet. And it's the only bird whose eyes adjust for refraction. If you've ever looked down into a lake and seen a fish and, tried to spear it or shoot it or whatever you're going to do, you normally miss because there's refraction and you don't actually know where the fish is. Osprey do. And I just think they're marvelous. I mean, they are perfectly designed for what they do. This is a great gray owl. I went to Minnesota to find it up at Zaxim Bog. I don't know if any of you have been there. It's a great owl place. But when I was at Zaxim, it was minus 36 degrees. And we saw one great gray, but we didn't get a good look at it. This one was in Yellowstone National Park. Another cold day, it was minus 25 degrees. But I was the only one watching the bird. And so I got to watch it for a couple hours uninterrupted. And I got to watch it dive into the snow, go down, 12, 18 inches and come up with its moles or voles or whatever it was grabbing. And it just put on a show. It was really cool. If you get a chance to go to Zaxim, which is up in Minnesota, and you go in the winter, you've got an opportunity to see a great gray owl, a boreal, a snowy, a northern hawk, a northern saw-whet, a barred, and a great horned. When I went, I saw 4 or 5 of those, and it was a fantastic trip. But I give you a cautionary note if you have not been. When you stop at the visitor center on your way to Zaxim Bog, which is a large area, and inside of that area, there are some private residences, they give you a warning sticker, and it says, avoid the north end of Stickney Road if at all possible. This is not a birder-friendly location. So I asked the ranger who handed me the pamphlet with the sticker, what does that mean? And he said, well, it doesn't happen all the time, but occasionally a couple of the guys out there take shots at birders. Now, apparently they haven't hit one yet, but I didn't really want to challenge their shooting ability. So I stayed off of Stickney Road, which maybe that was the owl that I didn't see. In addition to the 53, I spent some time looking for rarities. Some people chase them, some have no interest. I like chasing the Raptors. So this was a bat falcon, which was in Texas. This was part of that Harlingen fog story. That's what I was on my way down there for, that and the hook-billed kite. I found a stellar sea eagle in Maine. If you've read about that at all, they're almost 50% bigger than a bald eagle. They are massive, massive birds. I went 2 winters in a row. I missed it the first winter, but I did get to see it the second winter, and it was well worth the trips. And then you probably read about Flacco, the Eurasian eagle owl that was, because of vandals, was cut loose from the Central Park Zoo and lived in Central Park, I think about 18 months, but it recently crashed into a building, unfortunately, and died. Northern hawk owl, this is a shot from the one that I found. This was the last of the 53. I was at home. I got a phone call on a Friday night from a buddy who said, hey, there's one up here, you got to come see it. My wife got me on a flight about 8 or 9 hours later, but the people in the town didn't really want to help. They were afraid that, you know, you were going to let everybody know where it was and the bird would be overrun. And of course, this is one of the rare bird that is ghosted an eBird. So you can get down to like a county level as to where they're found, but you don't get specifics like you do with other birds. But eventually people up there warmed up to me a little bit, gave me an idea where it was, and I was able to find it. At one point I was standing on a dirt road, and it was on a telephone pole right next to the road. I was by myself, and it suddenly dropped off the pole, swooped down across the road, and actually brushed my blue jeans. It actually touched me as it went by, which again was just a thrill of a highlight. So those were some of the highlights from the trip. The whole trip, the whole process, the whole project was actually a highlight. Winding up getting to see all 53 was fantastic. Meeting those people was a joy. And so I wrote a book and published it, Raptor Quest. And I've written a bunch of different books. Most of them are Westerns. Just had a new one published today. But I've written children's books and books of quotes and other stuff. But this one was different. This was a once in a lifetime thing for me, and I really, really enjoyed it. If you have an interest in taking a look at it, you can go to my website, naturallyscott.com, and you'll see book up at the top, and it'll get you right there. It'll also give you a chance, if you want to see any more of my photos, you're certainly welcome to take a peek at those. I'd love to have you look at them. And so what I wanted to do was say thank you very much. I appreciate you guys giving me this time to share the story. I hope some or all of it was interesting to you. And I really hope there are some questions, because I'd be thrilled to answer them.
Scott, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
I certainly can.
All right, great. We do have some questions in the chat.
Fantastic.
And the first one I have for you is from Karen, and she says, Scott, thank you for sharing your beautiful photos. The American kestrels seem to be in trouble, according to the National Audubon Society. It might be due to lack of insects for the young birds to eat. Did you meet anyone working on conservation efforts for kestrels, or for any other raptors in your travels? What do you think
Actually,
of steps that people can take to help?
well, Karen, I'm not sure about that. I did set up a kestrel box on my property, and we did not get kestrels to nest in it, but I did get eastern screech owls this year, and we had 3 healthy fledges, so that was a thrill. The gentleman that I mentioned in Colorado, Scott Rashid, has noticed the same thing that you have, Karen, that a lot of us have noticed. And so he has started to do some research on that. He just sent me a note about a week ago that in the last couple of weeks, he's banded 93 kestrels. So he's going to do some research on that. I noticed even in the little area that I live in here, Lake Greenwood, South Carolina, we normally, well, I say normally, I've only been birding 4 years, but the first 3 years we had about 6 different pairs nesting within a couple miles of the house. And this year I haven't found any. So I don't know what's led to that. It doesn't seem like it would be poison or it would be affecting the other birds. It might be a diminishment of insects. I'm not certain. So this gentleman, Scott, is doing some research, as I'm certain others are. And hopefully we can all find out together. and it would be fantastic if there was, something we could do to help.
Yes, yes, I agree. I agree. Let's see, we have another question here. Can you talk more about ghosting in eBird? What do you mean by that?
Well, when you go to eBird, if you're looking something up, right? If you're traveling to an area, like if I'm traveling to Arizona, I'll look up the city I'm traveling to and look up the hotspots, and it'll show you, what birds have been found at exactly what hotspots. So you've got a good idea of where to go if you want to see a particular bird. But there are a handful of birds in the country, and most of them are raptors, where eBird ghosts them. And the reason they do it is because birds like falcons and goshawks are often captured and sold into falconry.
Oh,
And
wow.
so if you know that there's been one seen in the last hour at the corner of 8th and Apple, there's a reasonable chance somebody's going to go hijack that bird. So what they do instead is, let's say I see a falcon and I want to post that on eBird along with other birds that I've seen on that particular trip, I can post it and it will show up on my listing. It will show up on eBird, but all you'll get is a purple block pretty much for the county that it was seen in.
Hmm.
It won't narrow it down to where these guys that are out poaching these birds are able to find it easily. And so they call that ghosting. So
Wow.
if you want to look it up, for example, go on eBird, look up falcon, and you'll see, instead of a little dot, here's the hot spot, or here's where it was reported seen, you're going to find a purple box that covers a large geographic area. And so it makes it borderline impossible then for the poachers.
That is so disheartening.
It
Uh,
is disheartening because that means there are a number of people that won't ever get to see those birds. I mean, I got to see them because I managed to network in with some people, and you guys know how that works. A phone call here, a phone call there, and as long as you show that you treat the birds and the rest of wildlife with respect, then you get in on that little group. But if you're not a part of it, you just have to stumble upon it.
yeah, yeah. Here's another question. Um, what was the most surprising, unexpected, weird behavior you observed, birds or humans, in your adventure?
Oh, well, when you add humans, that's pretty easy. I I was in San Francisco, and oh shoot, I forget what I was looking for, but I was looking for something. And then I read again on eBird that there was a parrot in a small park. There was a flock of parrots in a tiny little park, maybe an acre. It was an urban park, but it was a bird I didn't have, and I had some extra time. I thought, okay, I'll go pick up a lifer, and so I got over to the park, and when you're talking about parrots and parakeets, they generally roost at the same place, but then they leave for the day. So I got there before sunrise, and there's a row of trees, and I thought, well, this is where they'll be. And sure enough, they start to make some noise, and I'm able to start shooting them. And I'm standing on this little berm, and all of a sudden I feel this sharp pain in my left leg. And I turn around and look, and it's a woman, and she's probably 80 years old, and she had a cane, and she just smacked me across the shin. And she's walking with her husband, and I said, excuse me, what was that for? Why are you shooting the parrots? And I said, I'm not shooting them, I'm photographing them. And she took the cane and whacked me again. She goes, no, you're trying to hurt them. And she hit me 3 or 4 times before her husband pulled her away. I didn't want to touch an 80-year-old woman, but I got to admit, I was getting tired of getting hit with a cane.
Oh
And
boy.
after they left, it turned out, because this is an urban park and it's surrounded by houses, and because parrots are extremely noisy, and they wake a lot of people up, there are condos behind this row of trees, and they're not birding fans. So they were shooting them with BB guns.
Oh.
And this woman saw my camera and the lens and thought I was shooting. Even when her husband said, honey, it's photography. And even every time he spoke, I got hit. I was hoping he would be quiet. So that was certainly
Yeah.
uh, the oddest thing that I
Yeah.
encountered, and I was pleased to see her saunter off.
Here's another one. Can you briefly describe what camera equipment you use? And
Sure.
have you ever digiscoped?
No,
Okay.
I'm not a digiscoper. I've got a buddy down in Florida who does a great job with digiscoping, and certainly a lot of people do. But I don't. It's just not a skill set or an interest I've developed. As far as cameras go, when people ask, I tell them I carry a pistol and a rifle. So I have a harness and I carry two cameras. One of them is a Sony A1 with a 200 to 600 lens. And, I use that obviously to get the close-ups. And then the other one is another Sony, but it's a 70 to 200 lens. And because I've started to shoot a lot of mammals, that get a lot closer, I wasn't able to get the mammals with the 200 to 600 as well as I had hoped that I could. So I added this camera to the arsenal, and I used it a couple weeks ago. My wife and I are up at Jasper National Park, and we got to shoot grizzly bears and black bears and elk and mountain goats and bighorn sheep. And there were a lot of shots I got that I would not have been able to get with the 200, 600. So next month we leave for a couple of weeks safari down in Africa, and I expect to get a lot of use out of both cameras. But those are the ones I use. I do some light processing in Lightroom. I don't change a lot of the pictures, but I'll clean it up just a little bit. Or like this ferruginous hawk, I'm guessing that I made that background 10 or 15% bluer than it actually is. And the thank you sign I changed. That actually says high voltage. That yellow sign is really there, but I changed it to thank you for the sake of the presentations.
Nice, nice. One more question and then we'll probably wrap it up.
Sure.
What would you say, what percentage of the trip would you say you were working with guides, and how much did you have to sort of ferret out by yourself?
Well, the way that I decided to do it is the first time I would go somewhere, let's say southeastern Texas or Montana or Arizona, I would hire a guide. And because they can show you the hot spots and help you identify some of the birds you might not be familiar with in the area, and give you a good idea of what to look for and where to look for. And after that, in so many of these states, including your state and Texas and Florida and Montana and California, those were the most commonly visited ones by me. After that, I tried to do it on my own. I wanted to get the head start, and take the wisdom and experience of people that knew the area much better than I did. And then after that, I worked hard to try to get to know the area myself. And so, like the Kalispell area, which is northern Montana, or Yellowstone, which is southern Montana, I've probably been to those two places a half dozen times each in the last 3 years. And so I feel now that I know them pretty well. Not well enough to guide. I do not have that skill set, but well enough to find the hot spots and to find the things that I'm looking for.
Great, great. So there's a learning curve there, and the
There
guides.
is for me,
Yeah,
other
for all of
people.
us.
Yeah, because a lot of people are able to study books and watch videos and feel really good about going into an area without the help of an expert. I don't have that much confidence, and I also, oftentimes I'm short on time, so having a guide come out with you, for me, just shortens up that learning curve dramatically.
Sure.
But then after that, I feel responsible for doing it on my own.
Great, great.
But
All
but to
right.
be clear, Liz,
Yeah.
that's not a judgmental thing.
Oh, no, no.
I've met a number of people who only go with guides or only go on
Sure,
tours.
sure.
There are as many different ways to bird as there are birders, and it bothers me when people are judgmental uh,
Yeah.
about the way that other people are interested in birds or other people bird, because I think that's, well, forgive me, but I think it's asinine. I,
Mm-hmm.
I think if we're outdoors and we're enjoying the beauty and the nature and friendships or solitude, and we're enjoying the birds and the wildlife and flora and fauna, who could possibly judge that and say you're doing it wrong?
Right, right. I agree. I agree.
So
All right.
my
Well,
proselytizing at the end.
there. Thank you again. Very interesting talk. And thank you also to our participants. And Hopefully, we'll see everyone back next month on August 13th to hear Margaret Dykman's story, and give some thought to participating in our coffee break events. So thank you and keep cool, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.